opportunity to see, well, really kind of any of us. So tonight, because the two people who are introducing one of your curriculum models are both here in class tonight, they're going to actually take you through their presentation. So I'm going to turn this over to Lauren and Amy.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. So we are presenting Talents Unlimited. The name of our curriculum model is Talents Unlimited. Before you read further, go to the class discussion page and icon and make a prediction about what you think this model is all about. So by this time, I'm sure you guys have already done that. All right. Oh, I should make this full screen. Can you see the screen also?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Beautiful Prezi.
Okay, so Talents Unlimited is about developing thinking talents. The goal is to improve students' critical and creative thinking skills within the context of the school curriculum. The work of Calvin Taylor suggested a grouping of talents based on theories of multiple intelligences and the need of the world of work. The talent areas he identified were productive thinking, decision-making, planning, forecasting, communication, and academic. In the 1990s, Carol Schlichter developed this theory into the Talents Unlimited model. So originally this was Calvin Taylor's idea, and Carol Schlichter kind of developed it into the actual model of what it is today. The 2U model layers instruction in metacognitive practices over the traditional school curriculum. As teachers teach about decimals, photosynthesis, or U.S. history, they're also intentionally teaching the following skills. These are the talent areas: productive thinking, decision-making, forecasting, predicting, communication, planning, and academic. So to start off with productive thinking, this is to generate many varied and unusual ideas or solutions and to add detail to make the ideas more interesting. An example is when students working in a math unit on surveying and graphing are asked to think of a varying of unusual topics for a survey they will conduct and graph during the day. Our next area is decision making. To outline, weigh, make final judgments, and defend a decision in light of many alternatives to a problem. Our example here is students who are preparing to order materials through the Scholastic Books campaign are assisted in making final selections by weighing alternatives with such criteria as cost, interest, reading level, and etc. So the students wouldn't just pick any book, they would make a decision on which book they felt was most interesting to them. Our next area is academic. And there's the photo. Thank you. The academic area is developing a base of knowledge or skill about a topic or issue through acquisition of information and concepts. Our example here. Our example here is students read from a variety of resources to gain information about the Impressionist period and then share the information in a discussion of a painting by Monet.
Oh, cool. Cool examples.
So here we go.
There. It worked that time.
Okay. And I'll turn this over to Amy.
So forecasting might look familiar. That's what we had you do in our first slide. Forecasting, making a variety of predictions about the possible causes and or effects of various phenomena. For example, students could conduct a parent poll on their school's dress code. Students who are conducting a parent poll on their school's dress code are encouraged before they do the poll to generate predictions about the possible causes for low returns on the survey. And planning, designing a means for implementing an idea by describing what is to be done, identifying the resources needed, outlining the sequence of steps to take, pinpointing possible problems, and showing improvements in a plan. An example of this could be students who are studying the unusual characteristics of slime mold and are asked to design experiments to answer the questions that they have generated about the behavior of the mold. Communication. Use and interpret verbal communication to express ideas, feelings, and needs to others. Very valuable talent. An example of this could be fifth graders studying the American Revolution. Role-play reactions of both loyalists and rebels as they hear the reading of the Declaration of Independence in an attempt to describe the different emotions of these groups of colonists. So those were the talents, the TU talents that teachers use to sort of undergird all of their curriculum. Now we also studied a few things about using TU specifically with gifted students. We found one article that showed that this was an effective model with both low-achieving and high-achieving students. The article we found showed that it was particularly good at improving the ability of gifted students to complete independent Renzulli Tier 3 type projects. And so this is practice time for everybody. We want you to watch this video and see how many of the Talents Unlimited talents this teacher's students engage with during the class projects she described. Does she tap into all of them?
I've been teaching for about 14 years, and for the majority of my career, I would consider myself probably a very traditional educator. This is what my classroom looked like for the majority of that time. My students tended to sit in straight rows facing the front because I was the one who was usually talking. I directed the show. I decided what we were learning, when we were learning it, how we were going to learn it, what the assignments would be, what books we would be reading, when the exam would be, and of course, there would be an exam. Essentially, I was the master of the universe in a very small domain. And to be honest, I taught like that because that's what I knew. That's the way I was taught. When I think about my elementary and my high school career, that's how I learned. My university, even though I was training to be a teacher, it was largely that as well. And to be honest, it didn't occur to me that there could be another way to do it. And so I replicated what I saw in the classrooms of the teachers that I worked with when I was learning to be a teacher. And it wasn't until my master's degree, when I was working on a master's in ed tech and design, and I took a class with Dr. Alec Kuros. And that class changed my life. To be honest, when I was taking it with it, it almost killed me. But it changed my life. It wasn't about technology, although at the same time it was. It was about pedagogy. And I started learning about things like student-centered learning and constructivism and inquiry and PBL. And for the first time, I began to realize that maybe my students could construct their learning. That learning is constructed in community, and that maybe they could be the center of it, and that maybe they would have something to say about it. And so one day, as I'm walking to class, I decided that I was going to ditch my lesson plan. And that is not something I did. I am not a fly-by-the-seat-of-my-pants teacher. I always knew exactly where we were going. And I'm thinking, as I'm walking up to, I had this kind of little podium because I was a science teacher. So, I was a master of the universe with a podium. How much better does it get? As I'm walking up, I'm thinking, I don't have to do this. I have a lesson. I can just teach that. I don't have to do this. Nobody will know any better. And so as I stood at the front of the room looking at my students, I said, if you could design school to be anything you wanted it to be, what would it look like? What would it sound like? What would I hear? What would I see? What would it feel like? What would you be doing? And when they realized I was serious, they began to write. And they wrote, and they wrote, and they wrote. And they giggled, and they laughed, and they chattered, and they wrote with such passion. And And then we began to talk. And really, although they did not say that, that was the bottom line. You know, they said things quite kind of like, I don't mind that you lecture, but maybe not quite so much. And, you know, can we sit on the floor and hear what each other has to say? And so we actually reconfigured our classroom so that we had this huge space, probably this size in the middle, and they all had these learning pods that we created on the outside, and we always sat in a circle in our classroom so that we could discuss. And I found out during this process that my students wanted to make a difference. And it turns out at the time that they had been learning about the wars that had been happening in Uganda, and how children had been enslaved as soldiers, and the schools had been destroyed. And my kids really wanted to do something. And so I said, okay, well, you know what, we need to do some research. We need to know what we're dealing with. We need to know what would really make an impact. And so the next day we went down to the computer lab and we were researching. And about halfway through the class, one of my students comes bounding down the stairs and says to me, okay, I know this research thing is like really important, but can we actually do something? And I said, sure. What do you want to do? And so she starts telling me about this thing that she had found, this Schools for Schools competition. And she's rattling off all this information, and now she's telling me I bring up the webpage and I plug in our information. And then basically at the same time that she finishes telling me all about this, I hit submit, and I said, okay, we're signed up. And she looks at me and she says, really? Absolutely. And so she turns around and she starts shouting to the class that we're part of this competition, and yeah, and awesome, and they're all excited, and they're texting and telling people, and I'm thinking, this is going to be awesome. You know, we'll raise a couple $1,000, my kids will feel like they're important, this will be great. And so the next day we come back to school, and it was a Friday, and my students come back to class and they say to me, Mrs. Wright, we have decided on a goal. I said, awesome, what is it? We have decided that we want to raise $10,000. And inside my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, do you have any idea how much money $10,000 is? And my outside voice said, that's awesome. How do you propose we do that? And they're like, oh, well, there's this thing called Change for Change, and basically, yeah, make all these, you know, change jars, and you put them around the city, and people can put change in them, and you can raise money. And you have to realize, I'm from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, that has a grand total with, you know, probably if you included all of our caps, 35,000 people. So you're going to need a lot of change jars to raise $10,000. But I'm like, okay, that sounds like a terrific start. So they start planning, and it was great. And then we left for the weekend. And the thing about learning, when it's something that your students have decided to do, is it doesn't stay in the walls of your classroom. It takes on a life of its own. And you don't necessarily control it anymore. And it just so happened that that weekend at a drop-in center in Moose Jaw, that there were kids from Uganda who had gone to the schools that had been rebuilt by this organization. And my kids heard them and heard how their lives had been changed. And they met them and they talked to them. And my kids were deeply impacted. And so, unbeknownst to me, all of this happened on the weekend, and they came back Monday. And they said to me, Mrs. Wright, and they told me the whole story, and they said, we've decided to change our goal. And I'm thinking, we ain't going lower, are we? And they said, we have decided we are going to raise $20,000. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, where I come from, that's a down payment on a house. Like, you have no idea how much money that is. And I think that was the brilliance behind it, to be honest. I think if it was adults, we would have struck a committee and we'd still be there figuring out how to make this happen, and we wouldn't have raised a cent. But kids weren't like that. And I said, okay, well, $20,000. How do you propose we do that? And that began the roller coaster of the next 45 days, because that's how long we had to raise this money. So we had the Change for Change jars. And then, we decided, well, how about we have a roast beef dinner and an auction? And so they began planning all that. We called the caterer. They started, doing all the details for that. It turns out that the kid who went around the city to get every auction item was a kid who never spoke in class. And to me, that was shocking. This was so far out of his comfort zone, but it was something he deeply believed in, that he decided to do it. And so there were these high moments like, the roast beef dinner where we raised $7,000 in one evening. And there were times where it's like, okay, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And then we planned a benefit concert, and we were going to, we had all these musicians lined up, and it was on a Sunday at the end of November, on the same day and year that the Riders made it into the Grey Cup. No benefit concert. Because in Saskatchewan, that's a really big deal. And so it's like, okay, well, how do we compensate for that? Okay, well, how about we hold a barbecue? And we did at the beginning of December, on a day when it was 40 below. And it turns out that the barbecues are stored outside, and that if you do that, the propane tanks will freeze. And so we had half a barbecue to barbecue 300 hamburgers and hot dogs, and it was a nightmare from beginning to end. And partway through, one of my students looked at me and she's like, oh, Mrs. Wright, this is so terrible. Everything's falling apart. We have to figure out how to fix this. And I looked at her and I said, have you ever planned a wedding? I said, trust me, you're going to need these skills. And so, at the end of 45 days, it was a Friday, our total was $15,000 in change. And I thought, it's not bad. We had about 25 kids. It was more than their first goal. I didn't quite reach a second goal, and to be honest, I was somewhat disappointed. But I left class thinking we did a good thing. But the truth is, the story wasn't over. Because during that time, my kids had actually split up into teams. They just created them themselves. We had a finance team, we had a PR team, we had, fundraising teams, and I would literally walk into class and say, so what are we doing today? And they would tell me. Some of the kids who had done the PR had been interviewed by the radio station numerous times, and the DJ there knew what my kids were trying to do in their goal. And so he went onto their webpage that day that showed our total, and he knew their goal was $20,000. And so, that afternoon, he got on the radio and began asking people to donate to help my kids reach their goal. And the crazy thing is, people did. By 6 o'clock, we were sitting at $19,000. And there was a live stream wrap-up party that was being held in San Diego by the organization that was doing this. And, they saw this little city of Moose Jaw shoot out of nowhere to wrap up $19,000. And through social media, they were actually able to get a hold of 2 of my students. And my kids told them what our goal is $20,000. And so, the people at the live stream party got on the live stream and asked people to donate to help my kids reach their goal. And the crazy thing is, people did. So by the end of it, my students had raised $22,824 American. At a time when we were not on par, we lost almost 10 cents for every dollar we raised. That day, I learned to believe in my students, to believe in what really deeply matters to them, and to remove whatever obstacles I can to try to make that happen. More importantly, my students learned to believe in themselves. They learned that they can make a difference. They had a saying the entire 45 days, we are not the future, we are right now. And my students learned that there's a world out there so much bigger than them, that cares about the things that they care about, and the kindness of strangers to help them meet a goal that they deeply, deeply wanted. Our schools need to be places that set our kids' hearts on fire, that they can figure out what they are passionate about, where we give them opportunities to pursue it, and that we can give them a place to make a difference now. One of the things that I've learned over and over from doing this kind of stuff with my students is that our students will often exceed our expectations of them if we only give them the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, and thank you for listening to that video. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, was anybody keeping track along with me of all the different Talents Unlimited talents that Shelley Wright's students did? First they started out, well, the first thing that she had them do was she had them engage in productive thinking to think of ways they wanted to change their classroom, their classroom environment. Then when they came up with it, then they chose a project. They made a decision as a group to get involved with the schools in Uganda. Then she had them do academic research into the situation in Uganda, which was now very meaningful for them because they'd made a decision. Some of the other things they did were planning. They did a lot of planning for fundraisers, for their roast beef dinner. They had teams of planners, PR and accounting and lots of different other teams. Forecasting. What was the big forecast they had to make was how much money they were going to raise. and which they kept reforecasting as they were more successful. And communication, they learned all kinds of communication skills. I think in particular the little boy who she talked about never spoke up in class, but when he had an inner-directed goal, he went out in the community and found things for their items for their silent auction. So, and you know that was, I was looking for a video. You know, we talked about finding a video to use that was about Talents Unlimited, and we couldn't find one specifically about the Talents Unlimited model, but that is Talents Unlimited in a nutshell. I think it's interesting because it's also got a lot of the other curriculum models that everybody's been talking about these last 2 weeks in it. A lot of autonomous learning, a lot of multiple intelligences, different levels of enrichment are all evident. And I guess I see that and I imagine after going through her class, what can those kids now do that they couldn't have done if it had been a
Structure the lesson.
right, yeah, standard sort of class. Yeah, if she had followed her lesson.
Yeah.
This she talked about. So yeah, that's what, so thanks for watching that, everyone. So here's our discussion questions. Should we read through the discussion questions?
Yeah, and because these are what will show up.
Yeah, so these will be on icon to think about. One question we had for And that was something that I hadn't seen before in any other curriculum models or any other teaching methods classes that I've taken. And I thought about it, and one of the hardest parts of teaching is the constant decision making that teachers are called upon to do. Making good decisions about methods, content, and classroom management is what makes a teacher effective. Decision making is a very important skill that has a direct relationship on how effective our efforts are in anything. If you are a teacher, how often do you ask your students to make complex decisions, not formulaic ones, in the context of your class? How often do you teach them decision-making processes? For everyone, even those of you who aren't teaching yet, what do you think is the relationship between citizenship and decision-making? That is sort of the one area that decision-making did come into play in one of my methods classes, was in terms of the types of citizenships that a democracy needs are ones that know how to weigh evidence and make decisions. So, yes, that's my connection. Some of our other questions are, number 2. What do you think of the Talents Unlimited model? How do you think it would work in your school setting? What advantages and disadvantages do you see? And number 3, go on YouTube and look at the video and look through the comments, because you're going to see a comment there, which is what I read all the time when I'm on the web and I'm reading education articles, and I hear about it in classes. You'll go find the one from Lucid Dream Character who points out that the Common Core standards prevent them from turning learning over to their students like Shelley Wright did. So what do you think, as a teacher of gifted students, how would you respond to that comment if you had to respond? I know most of us don't want to get into troll wars on YouTube, so don't actually post it on. We're not saying you have to post it on YouTube.
To respond.